So, I received a request from a viewer to explain the difference between capitalism, socialism, and Marxism. Now, on its surface, that doesn't sound like a very interesting question. It sounds pretty self-evident, but if you think about it, there's actually some interesting sociological implications of the three different systems. Basically, I do have something interesting to say on the matter, something more than just a basic dictionary definition. And we might as well launch into it because capitalism, socialism, and Marxism, that's a good order to go in. Now, capitalism. I'll be honest with you, I don't really like the word capitalism because there is so much baggage caught up in it. When we talk about capitalism in this part of the internet, we're generally referring to the free market economic theory. Well, if you look at the Black Bloc or the Occupussies, when they shout about capitalism, they're talking about something entirely different. And in fact, when the first time that the word became popularized was in the 19th century. And at the time of the Industrial Revolution, we were seeing a major shakeup in the previous economic order. Major displacements, major irregularities, lack of stability was rampant at the time. So what you have back then is all of these factory owners who previously had employed skilled artisans, highly skilled laborers that could make a living wage doing their specialized trade. All of a sudden, they replaced all of them with machines overnight, and you left all of these people struggling to make an income, which is where the Luddite movement came from. As I've said previously, the Luddites weren't anti-technology, they were anti-disruption of this magnitude. And of course, this is the environment that you see Marx writing his stuff in. So keep this in mind. Capitalism starts off with the owners who just happen to be in the right place at the right time. They already owned the factories, they already had the capital to invest in technology, and these people managed to make a killing while all the people that relied upon them, relied upon their jobs, were left destitute with nothing going for them. And even into the modern era, you do definitely see like the capitalists that run society aren't the nicest of people. They aren't necessarily there the way that Bill Gates and some of the software tycoons, they earned their positions. Might have been a little bit skeezy at times, but essentially they were visionaries that invented something that did not exist before them. And so you might call Bill Gates a bit of an asshole, but you don't feel a huge amount of resentment for the billions that he's made. He's earned them. Most capitalists, that's not so much the case. Most owners, most CEOs, some of them do very, very questionable practices. They're in bed with government. In fact, Ramsey Paul did a video recently about how Dow Chemical may have irradiated the city he was living in as a part of the military-industrial complex. And so when people scream about the unaccountability of BP with the oil spill, they kind of do have a point. And that really isn't what the free market is supposed to be about. And a lot of people, when they hear capitalism, that's what they think of. And so that's why I don't like the term. It carries baggage. Just because I'm for the free market doesn't mean that I'm for the status quo. But that said, I think Fringe Elements put it best. I don't know if he came up with this or if he was quoting somebody else, but he said to me once that essentially reality is right wing. And that's what Austrian economics is about. It's an accurate description of reality. Now, let's remember what Austrian economics is not. It is not culture. It is not anthropology. It is merely a theoretical description of how economic actors work. And yes, it's based upon the model of Homo economicus, the perfectly rational man. And quite frankly, none of us are completely rational. If we were completely rational, we'd spend all of our time calculating probabilities and we'd never get anything done. Instead, we use highly adapted heuristics, rules of thumb, that are approximately correct but can lead us into bad decisions if we're in the wrong environment. So, yes, economics isn't 100% true to humanity, but it's a very, very good model that doesn't require extensive mathematics to figure out. And furthermore, it's not supposed to be describing culture. It's not supposed to be describing anthropology. It's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. So let me give you an example of that. One of the most unpopular, around this part of the sphere anyway, one of the unpopular ideas in the Libertarian Party, one that I personally disagree with, is the completely open borders immigration. Now, let's say that you have a city that you're trying to run. Well, the economist will come up and tell you that to have the most profitable city in the world, you want to attract the most brilliant people on earth to come move to your city and invest in your city, and that will give you the greatest profit. In the purely economic sense, open borders immigration it's a net positive on the bottom line. But what's not included in that? What's not included is culture. And culture is more than just music and styles of dress and what spices you put on the food. Culture is the commonly accepted rules that we all live by. So in a culturally homogenous society, people know instinctively. They just know what time you're supposed to shut up and stop making noise so that your neighbors can get to sleep. They know one thing that we've been trained since grade school, here in Canada anyway, I think that's the only thing I learned in grade school, was how to form an orderly line, to line up. They always made us line up after we came in from recess. As ridiculous as it wasn't about organizing the kids, it was about training the kids how to form lines. We all know that when you're walking down the street and somebody's walking towards you, you pass on the right. It's these implied assumptions about society that just grease the gears. We know when we're expected to speak to somebody, when we're expected to make eye contact, etc., etc. Now, when you don't have these commonly accepted cultural norms, when people don't know what the rules are, they haven't been taught the rules since day one, or they're operating by different rule sets because they come from different cultures, you're going to have a lot of conflict result. And the price of this conflict is that you're going to have more policing, which is expensive. For instance, in every modern city nowadays, every large city with a multicultural group in it, we have to insist upon noise regulations. What time are you allowed to make noise until? In a small town, you don't have these problems. They might be on the books, but they're never enforced. If you want to have a really loud party on Friday night, you talk to your neighbor, say, hey, do you mind? You sort it out. Because you have that common culture. With the more mixed cities, you have conflict, you have a necessity of excess regulation, and that is expensive. Now, certainly in a global market of cities, there are going to be a few cities that really, really benefit from multiculturalism. Look at the United Arab Emirates, for example. Every culture, every people on earth go to that city to work. And it's chaotic, it's ethnically mixed, but it's just an explosion of wealth. Now, other cities might not want that. Their industries might not be so open to that. For instance, Hamilton is a steel refining town. The steel industry is what drives that city. And for them, having a very solid culture without a huge amount of immigration might be more beneficial towards them. Economic theory is not prescripted. It doesn't say that this city's good and that city's bad. It just tells you what the results of the policies are going to be. Now, if you choose to ignore what they say and go against their advice, you're an idiot and you will have a bad result. But economics doesn't innately say do this or do that. It just says this will be the result if you do this or that. Now, socialism. Socialism is almost always stupid, but it's not evil. And in fact, the ironic thing about socialism is it's largely a result of a successful capitalist system. Let me give you an example. Now, in economic textbooks, to try and simplify things, to try and explain to the reader what this whole theory is all about, they usually go back to the island hypothesis. You have 100 people on the island, and instead of each one of them engaging in subsistence agriculture, the person that's really good at collecting peat moss for fires collects peat moss and trades that with the guy that's really good at making carrots, and so on and so forth. And the island manages to produce a larger net wealth than they would have otherwise. But the thing about the island example is, let's say the guy collecting the peat moss, all of a sudden, he's out of a job for whatever reason. Global warming takes effect and people don't need campfires anymore. No longer sustainable for him to collect peat moss. Well, on the island, he can go back to subsistence farming. He doesn't really have to worry that much. Go back to that, maybe develop a new skill and start trading. His quality of life will go down a little bit, but it's not a permanent problem. It's not a lethal problem to him. Now think about the modern economy with all the complexities that we have. Let's say that you spend 4 years, like the Spoony one did, getting a degree in computer science, only to have the degree be completely useless as soon as you graduate, and no matter how hard you try, you can't find a job. And every job is like that. Every specialization that you get can quickly become useless, utterly useless, without even any transferable skills to a new industry. Or better yet, what if you make a bad gamble, you try and start a business and the business doesn't work out, what have you, you wind up on the streets. When you're on the streets in a modern economy, there's no way for you to get a job. The bare minimum to have a job nowadays is, first, you need an outfit to wear to the interview, something at least clean and respectable looking. You need to be able to shower each day. You need food, obviously, to survive, but you can't go hunt pigeons. You can't do that. There is a minimum threshold of living that you require before you can even find a job. If you have less than, geez, I don't know, $10,000 a year, and that's starvation level. But if you have less than $10,000 a year coming in a Western economy, good luck finding a job. And so you see how the advancement of the economy naturally leads to a demand for socialism. Now, that said, socialism is often stupid, but not evil. Let me give you an example of that. In Europe and Canada, we have socialized medicine. Now, does that mean that the cost is more expensive because there's no competition? Yes. Does it mean the system is wasteful and inefficient? Yes. Does it mean that there's going to be more deaths because people can't access the medicine that they need? Yes. But overall, with the socialized medicine, the thing is, it's applied evenly across the board. It's a very minor negative on life. It's stupid. It's like having cars without seat belts. It's stupid, but it's not evil. It doesn't destroy the society. It doesn't destroy the culture. It doesn't lead to a decline or a suicide of the civilization. It just means that old people are going to die 6 months earlier than they might have. And that if you get into a motorcycle accident, your odds of surviving are slightly lower. So it's stupid, it sucks, but it's not inherently destructive. And in fact, there's some cases of socialization which are even arguable. Let's go back to the homeless thing. Now, imagine that you own a city. You are the king of this city, or you're the CEO of this city, and your goal is not to get reelected and make people happy. Your goal is to make a profit running this city. Keep it the best city in the world, and you have a problem with homelessness. Well, what do? Short of, I guess, kicking them out of the city, but even then, if you kick them out of the city, you know what? These homeless running around, they're degrading property. They're shitting in the park. They're stealing things. They're panhandling, hassling your citizens. And even if you try and kick them out, they're going to be resentful. They'll lots of problems there. Your better solution is to try and reintegrate these people into the society. Because again, on the desert island, nobody's homeless. You can always go back to subsistence farming. And homeless people, although there's a lot of mental problems, there's a lot of things like that, but they aren't lazy. They don't have cushy lives. They don't have easy lives. They're panhandling all day. They're doing other stuff. They're fighting to try and make a buck in a market. You'd be far better off integrating these people into your economy. So how do you go about it? Now, and then this is where you get, like, where's smart socialism, where's it stupid? And for instance, if I were running a city, I wouldn't want a centralized bureaucracy of the homeless administration, because the bureaucracy, the outcomes are difficult to measure. It's probably going to be inefficient. It might help out some of them, but it's really going to help out the employees more so. You could go for a completely private system where you rely upon private donations to charities to try and help these people out, because charities actually do work quite well. And when they're responsible to the people donating, their primary goal is going to be to generate warm fuzzies for the donors. That's what the donors are buying. They're buying a warm fuzzy for their heart. But to get the warm fuzzies, they do actually have to help homeless people. In a case like that, it might actually be arguable to have a semi-public, semi-private system where you do subsidize the different homeless shelters, but you also encourage competition between them. Maybe give tax breaks to businesses that hire these homeless workers. There's a few different levels. In fact, when you're thinking about a private city like that, is it even socialism anymore? If you've ever worked for a large corporation, many of them choose to offer socialized services within the corporation. For instance, therapeutic mental help. Because if they have an employee that they've invested a lot of energy into, and the employee is going through a rough patch in their life, as a company, they'd rather spend the money to help this employee get over that and keep the employee for the long term, rather than risk losing the huge investment they've put into this employee. So socialism, when it's done intelligently, there's really no fine line between a well-organized private city, a private organization, and a completely free market system. Even companies will often give out stuff for free to encourage business. Now, the problem with socialism Because when we all think about socialism, what are we really thinking about? We're not thinking about this, you know, something minor like homelessness. We're talking about these massive bureaucracies, these massive social programs that are always centralized, unaccountable, and that their motives are completely divorced from their supposed ends. And we think about communist countries, this is precisely the problem there, is the bureaucracy is completely centralized. All economic product is owned by the government and dictated by the government. And yeah, the means and ends are divorced from one another. So you get horrible, broken, stupid products. It's like the healthcare system in Canada and Europe, except everything is broken. Good luck finding toilet paper. But communism is not the same thing as Marxism. Marxism really isn't so much an economic system as it is a strategy, a tool. Let's go back to Marx. Let's go back to the 1850s, when the economy was being disrupted by industrialization. So when Marx, a man that never worked a day in his life, looked around him, he saw these capitalists making huge profits and these workers being just denied an ability to even live. A small number of machine makers made a profit, but the people that were actually putting in their energy and investing in things that were working hard, they basically got the short end of the stick during that period of history. By pure accident of luck, the people that happened to own the factories were the ones that made all the money. As a contra example, you might want to think about the publishing industry and how it used to have a chokehold on making money off books, and the internet has completely undermined their position. But Marx looked at this and he saw this, and so he envisioned a society where the workers would reclaim the property. He saw these property holders that basically just by accident got rich off of all of this, and he thought the workers were going to rise up in rebellion and take back the property. Except that's not what happened. We did have a few communist takeovers in countries, but again, what we're talking about there is heavily applied socialism, and with all the terrible results that always goes with it. But it didn't happen everywhere. In fact, the places it did happen, it was really one group of elite taking over from the previous group of elites. And so what happened in the 20th century is that the Marxists started looking around, and they noticed that after the disruption of the Industrial Revolution, the workers were regaining property. True, you still had the big financiers, the capitalists that owned the land, that owned the factories and made a huge amount of money. But individually, workers were becoming part of the middle class. It was becoming easier to start your own business, to actually own your property, to reclaim your property within the free market system, own your tools, own your truck, and run your own business. And so they looked at this and said, well, how can we ever get the worker revolution to destroy capitalism? Well, this is when the Frankfurt School developed. And Frankfurt Marxism is essentially about turning one group against the other. See, because Marx started out with supposedly the workers versus the capitalists, but as time went on, those two groups kind of merged a little bit. We do still have the military-industrial complex, but there's no fine line between a worker and a capitalist anymore. And so what the Frankfurt School did is they started targeting groups, creating a group conflict. And so modern socialism, the socialism that we're seeing in the late half of the 20th century, the 21st century, is not just the centrally planned bureaucracy that we see, for instance, in the healthcare in Canada. Healthcare isn't about anybody against anybody else. It's about a feel-good, let's make sure everybody gets equal access to healthcare. It's not about group conflict. But most Marxist ideologies nowadays are. So you see feminism. Feminism rewrites history to try and argue that women were always victims and men were always mean, and it turns women against men and uses the state mechanism to transfer wealth between the two groups. You see racial nationalism, and it's always, racism is keeping the black man down, or Jews completely run the media and they're manipulating us and they're our enemy. Even Ezra Levant, if you don't know who he is, look him up. He's amazing. It's all about turning groups into conflict so that you can take power. You can take power, organize everything, run the economy, and these two groups will be too busy duking it out amongst themselves, disempowering themselves in the process, alienating themselves, that you can dominate everything. So when you hear about socialism, keep in mind it's usually a very stupid idea. It's usually going to be very, very inefficient. Again, with the homelessness, if you say, well, the city needs to provide a homeless shelter. Well, why aren't the churches doing that? Why aren't civic organizations doing that? Are you sure there isn't a free market solution that is better than the socialist solution? It really is amazing just how much free individuals can accomplish if you let them do it. And with capitalism, when there's a market failure with capitalism, there's never a guarantee that a government solution won't have the exact same failure, or even worse failures. Yes, there are going to be failures in the free market. There's going to be negative externalities that are so minor that they cost you a penny a day, so you're not going to advocate against them. Nobody advocates against them, and so there's this wide market failure costing everybody a penny a day, but there's no reason to assume that the government is going to do a better job of it. And furthermore, we have Marxism deeply infected into our societies, trying to turn groups against one another while making a profit off the top. Jesse Jackson, well, I can't speak to the man's soul, but he's certainly not doing anything positive for the black community, but he's making a ton of profit. He's getting a ton of power and feeling very good about himself while he does the whole thing at the expense of everybody else. So, socialism is usually a very, very bad idea. Marxism is a strategy to gain power. And capitalism, well, if you're talking about Austrian economics, it's bloody wonderful. If you're talking about the current status quo where the politicians and the rich business owners are all in bed together, well, that's a whole nother kettle of worms. So, hope that clarified a few things for the guy that was asking, and hope the rest of you enjoyed that. Aurini out.